Are you tired of being told what to think and how to act? Well, you are not alone. In case you haven't realized it, you have an internal GPS. It knows all you need to know about how to live your life. So it's about time you stopped letting the media and the government tell you what is true for you. In fact, it is exactly that time. It's time to think for yourself. And here to make sure you're doing just that is your host, mediator, author, and lawyer, Carol Gold.
Hi, it's Sunday, June 9th. I'm Carol Gold, and welcome to Think for Yourself. This week, I had the opportunity to watch two different congressional committees interviewing witnesses. The first was Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci was interviewed by the House Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus. And the other was Merrick Garland, Attorney General. He was interviewed by the House Judiciary Committee on the weaponization of the DOJ. And because I had the opportunity and actually took the time to watch the entire questioning of both of those witnesses who testified before those committees, I want to share with you my firsthand impression of each of them. And then I just want to spend some time on the hostage rescue of the 4 who were rescued out of Gaza over the weekend. So first, Anthony Fauci. There was a particular moment in his questioning, and it came when he was being questioned by Rich McCormick, who is a congressman from Georgia's 6th Congressional District. I believe he's been a congressman since 2023. And McCormick, coincidentally, was and is a physician, but particularly an ER physician. And so during COVID, he was literally on the front line, acting not as a congressman. It was pre his congressional service. In 2020, he was acting in his capacity as an ER physician. And so he came to the questioning of Fauci, not only with medical knowledge, but also with first-hand patient treatment knowledge, something that Fauci clearly lacks. And while his questioning was very intense, very spot on, very detailed, and very specific in what he was seeking or asking of Anthony Fauci, there was a moment. And that moment was when McCormick played an interview, an audio interview, I guess it was a radio interview, that Fauci had given during COVID. I believe it was during 2021. And in that interview, Fauci says, and I'm quoting most of this. There's a little paraphrase here, but I'm quoting the important parts. He says, in being interviewed and talking to his interviewer, when you tell people they can't go back to work unless they get a vaccination, when you tell people they can't go out in public and do certain things they enjoy doing unless they get a vaccination, when you tell schools they can't open unless the children are vaccinated, well then people's ideological bullshit falls away pretty fast. Those are his words, not mine. And so McCormick said to him, you said these very things, didn't you? You were pushing the vaccine. You were encouraging schools to close down. You were forcing people to get the vaccine. The entire time that the video was playing, or the audio was playing rather, the camera was on Fauci. And he looked like one of those deer in the headlight moments because you could tell he was absolutely unable to figure out how he was going to respond once this audio stopped and once McCormick posed the obvious question he was going to pose. All that Fauci said in response was, I wasn't referring to that. That was his statement, quote, I wasn't referring to that, end quote. The statement was erroneous. I don't even know what he was doing, except he didn't have an answer. He didn't know what to say. He was caught red-handed. He had just lied for hours in front of Congress saying he hadn't pushed the vaccine, he wasn't in favor of schools closing, all of the things that we know he did during COVID, he was denying, repeatedly denying throughout his entire day of questioning, and yet there McCormick had him in his own words. Let me jump to Attorney General Merrick Garland. Again, he was questioned before the House Judiciary Committee this past week. They were investigating the weaponization of the DOJ. The statement with certainty that I can make about Merrick Garland is, because I'm an attorney and I've been through a lot of trials and I've questioned people under oath in deposition, there are good liars and there are bad liars. There are good liars who can pull it off. For the most part, Anthony Fauci can actually pull it off unless he's talking to someone with medical knowledge or scientific lab knowledge. Unless he's talking to someone who can challenge him on his doublespeak, Fauci's pretty good at lying. Merrick Garland is possibly one of the worst liars I've ever seen. And watching him under oath was just frustrating, infuriating, but really also telling. He isn't good at it. He doublespeaks, he hesitates, he talks in circles, he doesn't answer questions, he filibusters, he answers questions he isn't asked because he doesn't dare answer the questions he is asked. And I think that between these two men, watching them, as I said, for 2 days, I spent probably 9 to 4 or 9 to 3 with a break for lunch, as did the congressional committees, watching every word. And I would say that the nation has just cause, number one, to feel that Fauci belongs in jail, not only for what he did in COVID, but he certainly belongs in contempt of Congress for the lies that he has told under oath. And Merrick Garland shouldn't be in charge of anything. He's an incredibly deceitful and an incredibly weak man who perhaps, because I believe he was a nominee for the Supreme Court under Obama, perhaps he was a good judge. I don't know how he could have been. He's not an honest man. That's just really clear. If you doubt me, just watch. It's on YouTube. You can watch the questioning of him. He has no business being in charge of any organization, let alone the Department of Justice. So now let me just segue to the rescue of the 4 hostages in Israel on Saturday. There's so much talk about innocent civilians, innocent Palestinian civilians. First of all, if there were innocent civilians anywhere, they were the people in those kibbutzim on October 7th who were civilians. Literally, they were not soldiers. They were civilians. They were mostly peace activists. The kinds of people who live on kibbutzim near Gaza, trust me, are peace activists. And they were actively engaged in helping Palestinians within Gaza. In fact, one of the men who was killed, not rescued, but who was recently killed by Hamas, used to go into Gaza every day from the kibbutz and bring back children from Gaza who needed medical attention and would see to it that they got the medical attention in Israel. So when I hear about the innocent Palestinians, I'm reminded of October 7th when the world saw that one picture of Noah, the young Israeli woman who was spirited away on a motorcycle with her arms up, pleading, trying to get her boyfriend, who was also being captured, to help her in some way. I think about that picture because the guys who were taking her on that motorcycle were not Hamas. They were, quote, innocent Palestinians, end quote. And there were many civilian Palestinians who participated in October 7th. The 3 men who were rescued on Saturday along with Noah, the 3 men who were rescued were all being imprisoned. They were being held captive in the home of an Al Jazeera reporter who was also on occasion a Hamas spokesperson. Another, I assume, innocent Palestinian. So when I hear and I see, as I did over the weekend, yesterday, watched the riots in the District of Columbia, the surrounding of the White House by people who call themselves pro-Palestinian, but they're not. They're pro-Hamas because they were out there rioting and protesting and demanding all kinds of relief right after October 7th, before Israel even put together its incursion into Gaza. So they weren't pro-Palestinian, they were pro-Hamas, and they remain pro-Hamas. Those people in the District of Columbia around the White House yesterday, they defaced public property, they wrote hate speech, sprayed hate speech, spoke and chanted hate speech. They sprayed the statues, they chanted hate speech. They assaulted park police who were attempting to protect public property. And there were no arrests. There were absolutely no arrests. Now, there were arrests over the weekend in New York. They arrested some people who unfurled the Support the Blue flags. Those people got arrested for felonies. But in D.C., where the real damage was done, where tens of thousands, I think, or at least thousands, if not tens of thousands. I read thousands. I don't even know how many. If you look at the pictures, you'll see yourself. Look at the video on YouTube. It looked like there were thousands of protesters around the White House who were being pretty aggressive, being pretty assertive, lighting firebombs on top of the statues. That sure looked like an insurrection to me. Those people were actually armed, as opposed to the people that have all been persecuted and prosecuted and jailed for insurrection around the 2020 election. You know, terror of any kind is predicated upon instilling fear. That's how terror works. It doesn't play by any civilized rules. Its goal is to terrorize and therefore make people submissive, frightened, and easily controlled. It's what Hamas and every other terror organization or regime-type government, like in Iran, uses to keep people, its citizens, in fear. It's particularly why October 7th was as savage as it was. And it's what is escalating in this country among these pro-Hamas / pro-Palestinian rioters. If you pay attention, these displays of opposition, I call them that, they're the kindest words I can use, are getting increasingly more brazen, increasingly more violent, increasingly more hateful. Because that's what happens when you don't stop this kind of behavior. Israel knows what it has to do to end terror on its border. It knows what it has to do, and it's doing it. Despite all kinds of misinformation, it's doing it in the most civilized and humane way that a nation can fight a military incursion. They're at war. They're at war because they were attacked on October 7th, and they know that the only way to make sure it never happens again is to annihilate Hamas. Hamas is not a few thousand terrorists embedded in Gaza. Hamas, its philosophy, its belief system, its religious underpinnings, its ideology are all of Gaza. That's who the Palestinians are after 2 and 3 generations of breeding hate for Jews, hate for Israelis. The latest polls, even within Gaza, show that 87% of the people support what happened on October 7th. That's not a small terrorist organization embedded in a population. That's a population that fundamentally supports terror, supports savagery, supports the beheading of children, the burning of children in ovens, the beheading of children in front of their parents, the murder of parents in front of their children, the rape of women. That's a population. That's a diseased population. And I say that without any qualms. Might there be a few people in Gaza who would prefer not to be part of that? Yes. But they are so terrorized and so embedded within that population. There's absolutely no way to determine who they are or to do what needs to be done within Gaza and somehow not harm those people as well. No nation has ever fought a war with as much compassion, with as much advanced post notice to the population to get out of areas that are about to be bombed, that are about to be stormed by the military. No army in the history of the world has ever done what Israel is doing. And so I don't care about the lies, and I don't care about the deception and the misinformation and the disinformation and the manipulation by people who, like the journalist who works for Al Jazeera, who, by the way, now denies he works for them. But if you went to their website, at least until today, it said that he reports for them out of Gaza. So they're lying too, like Merrick Garland, like Anthony Fauci. We are living in a world that is ripe with deception and rife with deception. And in your heart and in my heart, we know what's true. As I said, Israel knows what it needs to do to stop the terror. We in the United States apparently do not. Either that, or we lack the will to do what we know needs to be done. And if these people are not stopped now, before the rest of the summer, before the November elections, if this escalating violence is not stopped in its tracks by our government, be they state or federal governments, if we don't step in, then the West is about to find itself, and particularly the United States, living not only under terror, but ultimately under Islamic law. Because that's what these useful idiots don't understand, who are being used by these organizations, used by terror organizations, used by enemies of the United States to weaken us from within. These useful idiots don't understand what's happening, but most of us do. And a silent majority will not do it now. We cannot be silent, we cannot tolerate it, and we cannot allow our elected officials and our local police and our state police and our federal government to stand by and allow violence and terror to be accepted as the rightful way to protest in the United States. Thanks for listening. I'm Carol Gold. I'll be back here again next Sunday. And until I am, by all means, think and act for yourself.
Carol thanks you for spending your valuable time with her. It is her mission to empower you to remember how smart and capable you are. Be sure to check out Carol's website, carolgold.com. That's Carol with an E, gold.com. Please leave a review and subscribe here so you'll be alerted to Carol's next podcast. Until then, above all else, remember, it's time to think for yourself.